We're going to factor this quadratic expression. So the first thing I want to make sure is that, first of all, is it a quadratic? And it is, because here my highest degree is 2. So let's write that down. My highest degree is 2, which makes it a quadratic. Is it in standard form? It is, because this is a degree of 2, this is a degree of 1, and then I have a degree of 0 here. So it's in standard form, so I'm good to go. So the first question I need to always ask myself, is there a greatest common factor? So I'm going to look. This is 4x squared, 7x, and 3. Well, 7 and 3 are prime. 4 doesn't go into anything. So the answer here is no. There is no greatest common factor, which means that the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my x to figure out how I'm going to replace this middle term, because we're factoring by grouping. So to figure out what goes on the top, I'm going to multiply my first and my last term. So 4x squared times 3 gives me 12x squared, and my middle term is 7x. So I got the 12x squared by multiplying the first and last term, and the one in the bottom is my middle term. So now what I want to know, what are my factors of 12x squared that add up to 7x? So I know that x squared is equal to x times x. So that means I'm going to have an x times an x. So now I need to figure out what are my factors of 12. So when I'm looking at 12, my factors are 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4, and then it repeats. Okay? So I want to know which one of these, when I add them up, is going to equal 7, and it's going to be this. So that means I'm going to have 3x and 4x. So as we saw in previous examples, this is what I'm working for right here, because that is going to replace my 7x. So that means now I'm going to rewrite this problem. I'm going to bring down 4x squared. This gets replaced with 3x plus 4x, and then this comes down as plus 3. Let me highlight this here like this so that you can see that that's the same thing as 7x. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor by grouping. So I'm going to look at my first part. I'm going to ask, what's the greatest common factor between my first two terms? Well, I don't have a common factor between 4 and 3, but I do have a common factor between x squared and x. So I can divide x out of both terms. So I put that in the front. Just want to show you that comes out in the front, undistributing. So then when I divide, this becomes 4x. Let me do it in a different color. That becomes 4x. When I divide 3x by x, that just gives me a plus 3. So now let's look at the second part. I'm looking between 4x and 3, and initially I think there's nothing in common. However, I can always factor out a plus 1. So I'm going to write plus 1. That's what I'm distributing out. So now when I do my division, when I divide 4x by 1, I get 4x, and when I divide 3 by 1, I get a plus 3. So we can see that 4x plus 3 and 4x plus 3 are the exact same number, which means I can divide out 4x plus 3 as a common factor between these two terms. So that means then that 4x plus 3 comes in the front. And I know that 4x plus 3 divided by 4x plus 3, that's the same number on the top and the bottom, so that divides out to 1. So I'm left with 1 times x, which gives me x. And the same thing here. 4x plus 3 divided by 4x plus 3, that divides out to 1, so I'm left with plus 1. So I have just done this factoring. So now this is my quadratic in factored form.